All right, well, thank you for staying with us. This is NTV Tonight as we take a look at what's been happening in the country. With me this evening and also joining me in studio is the Law Society of Kenya President, Faith Odhiambo. Thank you so much for making the time for us this evening. A lot has been happening in the country, but I want us to begin with the latest, which was the ruling that was made by High Court Justice Lawrence Mugambi on the deployment of the Kenya Defence Forces. This is something that the Law Society of Kenya was against. In fact, you petitioned against that decision. If I look at what the High Court judge had to say while green-lighting now this deployment, he has ordered that the terms of the deployment be gazetted within 2 days. And he also spoke on the issue of militarization of the country. He said, and although there was a lot of technicalities on the ruling that was made, that the deployment of the military in a blanket manner without specific details about the period of deployment would likely result in the militarization of the country. However, he still continued and okayed and green-lighted that particular decision. This is something you challenged as LSK. I just want to first get your initial thoughts on that ruling.
First, let me start by just saying I condole with the families who have lost their loved ones. I've seen a story of a child that I think over 10 bullet wounds on his body, and one again shot in Rongai, and a few others that have since been shot. Some have lost their lives. I condole heartily with those families, and I keep getting all these SOS messages, which brings the pain that we have as the Law Society of Kenya, because I remember the good judge was talking about, on one hand, he has to balance the constitutional rights of safety, of property and life vis-a-vis right to picket. And I was asking myself in those 2 minutes, which life are the police protecting? All these cases of deaths that are being reported, unless it's the civilians killing themselves, I'm wondering which life was he balancing when he's arguing those points. But then again, we say we respect the decision of the court. And you see, my concern raises in that I find that's a very dangerous precedent that the good judge has given. Because on one hand, he raises great concerns with regard and a part and parcel of what is required in the Constitution. Then he goes ahead and still says they are properly deployed. Then further gives the government leeway and gives them 2 days to issue a new gazette notice, trying to give guidelines to try and purge the issues that we have raised that are constitutional in nature, that are based on legality, and the question of the unilateral nature in which this whole process was done. And so all I can say is that we'll fight on, and we'll still forge on. We're still regrouping and planning what's the next way forward. He said the ruling will be out tomorrow. So once we have the ruling, we can push on to the next way forward.
Which would be?
We're considering 2 options, whether an appeal or seek a larger bench to hear and determine this petition, because as it is, there are concerns that we still have with even the reasoning and him going ahead to give government. He's literally becoming a litigant, giving also further directions. But I say we respect the rule of law and we respect his decision, and we look for the other ambits that we can seek redress.
And this is despite the concerns he's raised as well as to why he green-lighted when he stated that the invasion of Parliament and the Chief Justice's office by peaceful protesters allegedly met the definition of serious, unprecedented, and potentially dangerous situation requiring immediate action.
Well, that was his position, that by the fact that that happened closer to home, the office of the Chief Justice. But you see, the underlying question is he has to look also at the other balance. What led to this occasion? Is it really an emergency? Because if you look at the kind of escalation that has been happening, and the Law Society has continuously raised, that the more you're aggressive to people, the more you're attacking them, the more you're killing them, you're creating monsters, because they are fighting also to save their lives, because that escalation to get to that level, there have to be trigger points. Because if you remember the Tuesday, apart from the unfortunate death of Rex, they peacefully protested, and even the night they danced through the night. They did not end up destroying any property, because the kind of aggression that they later saw on Thursday was not the kind of aggression that was there on Tuesday. And so this built up, and I don't buy it that it was an emergency, because we have all the security apparatus in this country. And so they could have foreseen this escalation. They could have ensured they're properly deployed. We recently sent our own officers of the National Police Service to go to Haiti. If you're saying that the National Police Service was overwhelmed, why, if they were, why so? Because some have been deployed elsewhere. They should have deployed the same army elsewhere. And the reality is he's made his decision, but we will continue to fight on.
All right. So from LSK's position, because, and you can make us understand what would constitute that Gazette notice by the CS, and of course subsequent okaying by the High Court on the issue of us being in a state of emergency. Were we in a state of emergency to a point where we needed the CS to, you know, put out that Gazette notice to allow our military to help the police?
Well, if you listen to the decision of the judge, he said this was different from the state of emergency. He said this is a different kind of emergency, and he picked the definition as per the dictionary. He said, you know, the Constitution provides what parameters are for an emergency, and particularly a state of emergency.
All right.
So there are parameters, what the president must do, the process that must be followed, and we say this process was not there. So there was procedural technicalities as per the Constitution, but he went ahead and said it was proper. There was actually an emergency, and that there's no special meaning in that section of emergency, so you could pick the definition as per the judiciary, that by the time there was the breach of parliament and breach at the judiciary, then that amounted, according to his decision, that amounted to an emergency that needed the immediate deployment of the Kenya Defense Forces.
All right. So we earlier on we saw the military patrolling the streets here in Nairobi, although they did not directly engage with civilians. What does this deployment mean, you know, for the public perception, the optics of it? For, you know, just generally looking at it when you see the military, you know, their vehicles walking around.
And those are the concerns that we're raising to the judge, that, you know, seeing military on your streets creates an element of fear. It's not just on your rights to picket, but on your daily life. Because today morning, there are certain routes that were cordoned off by the military, and they don't negotiate, they don't talk to you. Either you follow their orders or they become aggressive. So that's what we were greeted with this morning. And so if this is going to be our next life for, I don't know how long this is going to be, because the judge gives guidelines that let them go and publish. They can say they'll be here for a whole year or 2 years. So we'll be governed or supported by the military until, you know, the state feels comfortable. And this is the dangerous precedent that we are saying is not good for the country. That if we there cannot be checks and balances, because there's a reason why Parliament has to give prior approval, so that they are, as our representatives in Parliament, are able to defend the people of Kenya. But even as that kind of decision has been made, it means that in hindsight, that can be pulled out again and said, you know, there's a decision that the courts say, you know, something like this happens, it escalates to, that's an emergency. We will pull out our Kenya Defense Forces on our people. Because you could see even generally, there were not so many people on the roads as you usually expect, because thinking that the army is walking around, it doesn't inspire confidence. And I think even as our nation looks into it, our head of state should equally be worried, because if you need to instill fear into your people to govern them, meaning that there's no confidence that the people have in you, and the resentment will only grow. You will not be able to bring back peace and reconciliation in your country.
All right. Let's talk about what we saw also today in Nairobi and other different parts of the country as well. So there were small groups of demonstrations that were happening, but relatively lower than what we had witnessed on Tuesday. But then again, this is coming at a time when the president delivered a statement the previous evening, that was yesterday evening, talking about having a national dialogue and saying, look, I concede and I will not sign in that finance bill 2024. But we still saw people come out. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the reality is, even if you listen to the kind of conversations that are going on, the first thing that you note that there's total lack of trust of the people to the presidency. And why I would say that is that the moment he said, and you know, later on he did a memorandum that was very clear, giving to directed to the Speaker of the National Assembly. But the words that he used, that he would withdraw, people started, you know, everyone becomes a scholar and is reading to determine, can the president actually withdraw?
Right.
Well, so everyone is like, why would he lie to us? He cannot withdraw the bill. He can reject the bill and refer it back to Parliament. And so there's a great mistrust. So people feel that, one, this is probably a ruse to help people forget. And later on, by the time the next sitting of Parliament, they will make a few changes and push back the bill to come back. And so people have a lot of mistrust and anger, and they feel that the head of state is taking them for a ride, and soon the finance bill will be back again and we'll be going through this circle. And that's why people were saying, we're coming back to the streets. And others were saying, if you're saying that you want to reconcile, to dialogue, why are you putting the army to kill us? So those are the questions that people are asking. The police brutality, if you saw even today, is still there. The killings were ongoing. In fact, I saw a video of the same killer cop that was captioned as the one who killed Rex, shooting at someone again before he got into his car. So there's no goodwill, and most of the people feel there's no honesty from the executive. That if they truly want dialogue, then you have to show it by action. And that's why people still feel, and you know, messages, people are still saying, you'll put the army out on us, but we'll still regroup to the streets.
But even with all this, there also have been concerns that have been raised that goons infiltrated the protests that were organized on Tuesday and also today, where we saw vandalism. Although today not so much, but on Tuesday there was a lot of vandalism. There was a lot of shops that were broken into, and a lot of things that public property and private property were destroyed as well. Is that something that LSK is concerned about?
Of course we are concerned about it, but I was actually at the Supreme Court and I witnessed, and I also suffered from the goons, and these were not the normal demonstrators. You could see the way they were behaving, the anger, and just generally how, you know, they broke into the place. These were not the normal protesters that we were seeing singing on the road, chanting the national anthem, you know, walking hand in hand, waving and at the streets. These were not the normal protesters. So there's a need to distinguish between the protesters and the goons that are there on the streets. And so as much as the reality is that, yes, goons infiltrate, we need to find a way that the police can help even guide, because normally once you issue a notice, the police are supposed to be there to protect the protesters and also the property, so that they guide them on their way as they protest. But here the problem that even goons find it easier to join in the demonstration, because the police are on one side fighting you as you are trying to proceed in your demonstration. And so everyone is rounded up like you're all part of, you're either all the goons or you're all protesters as one. So there's no easy way of identifying who is the goon, who is a protester.
Right. I want to touch on this particular matter and get your thoughts on this. So yesterday when the president delivered his speech, a little later, the deputy president also delivered a speech from Mombasa, and his statement criticizing the NIS Director Nordin Haji for failing to give the president the information on what was happening in the country. What does this speak of?
Well, I find this quite ludicrous, actually, because the Deputy President sits in the National Security Council. The Deputy President has been listening to all the representations that have been made by those in the private sector, by the different organizations that have tabled, by the civil society organizations, as well as the Law Society of Kenya. The Deputy President has been having rallies moving around the country. And to say that you are not aware of the mood of the country is either that you're not in touch with the people or you have not been taking your job seriously. Because if you have it's no-brainer that people have been having an outcry on the cost of living. People have been having an outcry on what the impact of the finance bill is. So it's not something that is new that just popped up, that you could say I'm blaming the NIS head, Nurdin Haji, for. And so I feel like this is their internal squabbles between him and the head of state, that one person had to be the scapegoat. Mm-hmm. But I think as a presidency, the principles, he's able to get all the security briefing, he's able to sit and discuss with his principal. They've been working hand in hand. And so fighting your internal issues in public and seeking for, sympathy, I don't think that's the right direction.
So this public division would suddenly intensify the mistrust that even the public has in the government.
Exactly, and I say that the fact people mistrust already the government, and when you see them talking at each other, then it means that even the people are asking questions about the presidency. They're supposed to be two principals working hand in hand together, helping each other. And I think his speech should have started with a concession of his responsibility. Was he involved in at any stage when the finance bill was being developed and some of the issues that were being raised? He should come out truthfully and tell Kenyans, concede where he's been wrong, concede on the concerns, because if you looked at the budget, his budget was quite heavy of the kind of renovations that are going to be done, increase of cars, the amount that he was going to get for his use. So you cannot tell me that you're living this lavish lifestyle and your eyes are closed to whatever is happening around the country. I think these are just squabbles that are bringing out to the fore, and it's quite unfortunate because right now, more than ever, the president and the deputy president should be working hand in hand to ensure they secure back the trust of the members of the public and ensure that they bring back peace to ensure economic development in this country.
All right. Thank you, Faith Odhiambo. Well, we are going to now take another short break here on NTV Tonight. We appreciate your time. But also on the other side, Dan Mwangi will be having a conversation with Irungu Houghton, the Amnesty International Kenya Executive Director, on the human rights perspective of the protests that we've witnessed in the country this week. Let's take a break. We'll be back.